The queen decided to return to the original story, and I knew that not because she announced it, but because the apples suddenly became perfect. Not fresh, not ripe, but perfect in the way only poison ever is, polished until they looked unreal. Red until they stopped looking edible and started looking symbolic. And when rulers lose control of the present, they don't invent new futures. They reopen old scripts. And nothing in this kingdom was older than the belief that I could be solved with fruit. So by the time the palace kitchens began whispering about apples that were too carefully chosen, too deliberately displayed, I already understood what she was doing. Because certainty is addictive, and the queen had gone back to the one certainty she thought the story still guaranteed her. And the apple arrived wrapped in ceremony, carried on a silver tray like an apology disguised as tradition, delivered by hands that trembled just enough to betray how many people already suspected this wouldn't work. And I watched the court lean forward together, the way audiences do when they recognize a scene they were promised before the performance even began. Because everyone knew this moment, the poisoned apple, the inevitable bite, the clean ending to a complicated problem. And I almost admired her for trying. Because this was her last remaining advantage. The assumption that stories, once started, would finish themselves even if no one believed in them anymore. And when the tray was placed before me, I took the apple without hesitation, which immediately unsettled the room because hesitation was what they were expecting. Fear, confusion, delay, but I didn't bite it. I looked at it, really looked at it, turning it slowly in my hands like a curator examining a forgery, noticing how flawless it was in the way only traps ever are. Smooth to the point of suspicion, red in a way that felt less natural and more intentional. And I could practically hear the fairy tale clearing its throat, preparing to move on without me. So instead of playing my part, one smiled and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "This is new," which confused the entire room because it very obviously wasn't. And the queen's eyes narrowed as she ordered me to eat it, her voice sharp with the kind of authority that expects compliance to do the rest of the work. And I agreed politely while continuing to rotate the apple, examining it from every angle, like a museum piece. And then I made my first real mistake. Or at least that's what everyone thought, because I said I was impressed. And that stopped her cold. Because admiration was not part of the script, and when she demanded to know why, I explained calmly that she had lost control of the mirror, destabilized her authority, failed to opt out of the system she built, and after all that her response was produce, which sent a visible ripple through the court. And I added that while tradition deserved points for longevity, this was the same plan that failed the first time, and it only worked then because I didn't know I was in a story. And when she snapped that I thought I was clever, I corrected her gently that she was counting on me to forget. And that forgetting was the one thing I wasn't going to do. And I lifted the apple higher so everyone could see it clearly, rotating it slowly, theatrically, feeling the tension tighten as this stopped being a private confrontation and became a public lesson, because rulers fear demonstrations more than rebellions. And I explained that the apple relied on 3 assumptions. That I didn't know what it was, that eating it would end the problem, and that everyone present would accept the outcome as inevitable. And I pointed out that all 3 assumptions were outdated, not because I was special, but because the system that made them work had already collapsed. And when the queen accused me of stalling, I told her I wasn't stalling. I was teaching, and I turned to the court and explained that if I ate the apple, the story would continue exactly as it always had. If I refused it, the story would stall uncomfortably. But if I explained it, if I broke it down in front of everyone, the story wouldn't just pause, it would break. And then I did something no version of this fairy tale ever prepared anyone. For I sliced the apple cleanly in half, and the gasp that followed wasn't fear. It was recognition, because the inside was pristine. Pale flesh unmarred by rot or poison or anything visible at all, which was her second mistake. Because invisible threats only work when people trust the system that labels them dangerous. And that trust was already gone, and I pointed this out pleasantly, noting that there was no visible poison and that she was relying on authority rather than evidence. And when she stepped forward to stop me, I told her I was almost done, placing the apple halves on the table between us and explaining that if I ate it, she would win. If I refused, she would look desperate, but if no one ate it, if everyone simply looked at it and did nothing, Then the apple would stop being a weapon and start being a question. And no one moved, not the servants, not the courtiers, not even the queen, because suddenly the apple wasn't about me anymore. It was about whether anyone in that room was still willing to perform belief on command. And the silence stretched heavy and public and irreversible as I watched the queen realize in real time that returning to the original plot didn't work once people had seen behind the curtain. That nostalgia was not authority and tradition, was not control, and when she finally spoke quietly, asking whether I thought I had won, I shook my head and told her no. That this had simply stopped working, and I pushed the apple away and nothing happened. No lightning, no curse, no dramatic collapse, because the poison apple failed not because it was ineffective, but because it required participation, and participation was the one thing I had learned to withhold. And as the queen stared at the untouched fruit, I saw uncertainty settle over her face. Not about me, but about herself, and I understood that this wasn't the end of the conflict. It was the end of simplicity, because when old plots fail, rulers don't give up, they escalate. And whatever came next would not be elegant or symbolic or wrapped in tradition. It would be personal. And unlike apples, personal attacks don't require belief to work.